Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Voltron video. This is going to be my review for Voltron Legendary Defender Season 7, Episodes 11, 12, and 13, the last three of Season 7. Again, this is my first time watching them. I've just done videos covering the other batches of episodes, and initial reactions are that I definitely enjoyed the season, and these three episodes specifically I thought were good. I think some of these big climactic final battles are beginning to become a little stale, following the same format of big threat, blocking a laser of some kind, big kind of doomsday weapon. Big fight against some giant robot, they just about managed to defeat it, and then, there also turns out to be some giant bomb-like thing at the end that the Paladins have to defeat. In that, last season, what was it? The universe was basically going to, explode, and they had to stop that after the big, mech fight with Lotor, and, previously we'd had, earlier on in Season 6, we had the whole moving plates into position to block the planet. So, similar ideas, I think, coming up a lot throughout these seasons in some of these big battles that just detract a little bit from what's going on here. Not to say that it completely took all the tension away from it, absolutely not. What this season did well was making Earth the focus, made everything feel more heightened, in that it was humans. If there was any collateral damage, it was going to be humans, and so having all the characters be at risk on this planet, and failure meant the loss of their home planet, was very, very big. So I'll give it praise for that, and especially with the first episode here, 11, I think the main focus for me was how they did the sort of redemption / death of the Admiral. Obviously they did the thing I think we pretty much all expected, which was that, okay, she made this deal, which was ultimately to help humanity, because she basically gave up on them actually having a chance, so she made a deal to ruin their plan so that he would ultimately spare them in the end. But of course he went completely against the deal because she had no power to enforce what the deal was. She's put in prison, completely down about things, and the Paladins, I suppose, give her that hope and in a way inspire her to make her final stand, to give the Paladins time to communicate with their lines and get them to where they need to be, which was, again, a cool moment, seeing them being able to basically pilot the lines borderline by remote control, by seeing through the eyes of the line, which was all the way back in Season 1. They referenced this, and that Shiro was the only one who was able to do it, and there's been little allusions to it without it ever being properly brought up, but we saw it happen here, and I think the reaction from Shiro finally seeing all of them accomplish it was very, very cool to see. We saw, I suppose, primarily in the second episode, of course, the giant... The threat was that all the weapons would come together, and if even two of them combined their blast, they'd have the power to destroy Earth. So a lot of blocking shields, a lot of shields in position, percentages going down, that sort of thing, which again, we've seen a lot of that in the battles up to now, which is fine. It's just that it doesn't make the battles feel incredibly creative. And especially with, I think, what's been an ongoing complaint since the start of the series of, I'm not the biggest fan of the stock footage that they use for the Voltron transformation every time, in that I feel it takes away from... imagine how cool it would be if Voltron formed, on screen. We just saw the team form together, get into position, and gradually form Voltron in the middle of an action set piece, instead of always needing to basically have the character say something like, "Oh, we need a bit of time to form." Then the series just kind of cuts away from where we actually are into this stock background. Voltron forms and then comes out in wherever it is. It'd be so much cooler if the lines are just flying in formation, they decide to form, and then they're kind of transforming as they go through sequence, and one or two of the lines stays in line mode a little bit longer, waits to actually lock into position. I think that would add so much more depth to the fight. Now maybe it's a bit difficult to animate, but I'd like to see something like that happen, because I think it would give them an advantage at times. But anyway, yeah, we got Shiro versus Semdak. Shiro ends up having to go out on a mission of his own to destroy the power crystal on one of the opposing ships. And he accomplishes it. Then he and Semdak have their rematch, basically. And it was cool because, of course, they both have similar type of hands, with the idea of, like, they're attached by a sort of, like, energy field to their hand. They don't actually have, like, a kind of shoulder kind of section. And it was a nice fight, just with the sense of, like, you had that history behind it. I ultimately feel in the dialogue they didn't really accomplish getting the rivalry across all that much, minus us as fans knowing the sort of history that there was between the two of them. Part of that is probably just that is like a season 1 thing, and we haven't really addressed them as being a rivalry since then. So it's one of those ones where, like, it makes sense that they'd fight, it's fitting, but beyond that, not as much. You know, the two commanders fighting, given that Shiro took up that role here, that's one of the big things that we did see here, was absolutely Shiro stepping up, everyone looking to him as the commander of the Atlas, with obviously the Admiral dead. He is looked upon to lead, not Karan, not the other lieutenant guy, him. And he took on that role and did it very, very well. And it's sort of what I predicted for him in the end, that this would be the role he would settle into. Obviously, I didn't know how much they'd incorporate the Galaxy Garrison, but like I would assume that they would have made the new castle and he'd be the commander of the castle. It's the same thing here. It's just they have humans in as well involved. So that definitely made sense. That was a cool thing to see. And even when he comes back sort of injured, he steps back up to the plate and gets right back in action to command. But yeah, so they managed to defeat the like Semdak's like force, which is attacking Earth. And then out of absolutely nowhere, another mech-like Voltron thing drops down. Robeast, I think is what they were previously called. I don't know if you call this one a Robeast, because it feels like just a Voltron that doesn't combine. But like, you know, it's probably made of the Comet alternate reality Comet material. It's probably quintessence enhanced. It basically is a Voltron thing that has even more powers. And they spent a long time, like the entire last episode was devoted to basically getting across how powerful this thing is and how Voltron basically has no chance. That they couldn't do anything to this. They had Voltron go through a couple of different power-ups, still didn't work. They revealed that the Atlas can transform into a giant robot thing, which again, please explain to me what happened there with Shiro. I thought it was really, really cool to see Shiro kind of connect with the ship, connect with the quintessence. I'm wondering, is it relating to the fact that like Allura put one of those crystal things in his arm and that's how he can do it? Is it something about the fact that it's a clone body? Is it something about the fact that he spent so long inside the Black Line that he has a connection to like quintessent enhanced material, machinery? I'm not sure, but either way, what he did was he managed to, like Allura has done in the past, basically power up the Atlas, activate this transformation sequence and turn it into this giant thing. And initially I was just thinking like, okay, it'll be like Voltron and the Atlas transformed up against this thing, and like, you know, I'm thinking that like they're all roughly the same size, but then as it comes down to deliver its first punch, I'm like, oh yeah, the scale. I've completely forgot that the Atlas was like much, much, much bigger than Voltron. So seeing the size of the fist was actually a really cool moment, just with how the scale was. But even then, they immediately diminished how powerful it was, and that like, okay, that'd be cool against any other threat, but this thing manages to handle Voltron and the Atlas transformed, in that it has this ability to like project energy, and it can like size shift and still have like a physical form. That was really powerful, the way it was able to just deal with two differently sized things so effortlessly. And there's a point where you think that like again, have they just like completely destroyed Voltron? Like, have they stabbed directly through Voltron? There's a point at which I thought they were going to cut one of the arms off Voltron or something. they didn't quite do that, but it looked like Voltron was just down and out, and they eventually do manage to get back up. And this is perhaps where one of the slight weaknesses comes in that, like, okay, they eventually locate the weak spot, that it's got this sort of like black hole energy thing that comes out of its chest, that to power itself up, it opens up the armor in the center, powers itself up, closes it. So the only opportunity they have to defeat it is to strike while it's open, and they use the Black Bayard and Red Bayard boost of, like, they form sword, they get the boosters, and they go in and stab it straight through, and they manage to defeat it. Cool moment, just happened very quickly. Like, it's just, to use, I suppose, like wrestling jargon, it's the style of, like, match that's often frustrating to see, which is that the babyface, the good guy, gets beaten down for the whole match in an effort to build up, like, sympathy for when the comeback actually happens. It's actually good. But when it's just as simple as that, it's just like 10 minutes of, like, utter devastation against the good guy, and then boom, it's over. It doesn't quite have the same feel as it would have had if it was a little bit more back and forth. But that's just my thoughts on how the fight dynamic went this time out. I still thought it was, you know, cool fight, but I was wondering, like, even by the time they defeated it, like, they're really not going to tell us what this is at all. Like, the pilot inside this or whatever is not going to speak this whole time. No one's going to come in and reveal that they've sent this thing down. And then especially when it turned out to be a bomb, I was definitely a bit like, this feels very repetitive. I know they haven't directly done the whole, like, the thing they destroy ends up being a bomb, but they've done the bomb plot a bunch of times. Like, last season, more or less, with the universe kind of expanding out, was sort of a bomb similar type thing. The previous season, they had, like, a planet about to be destroyed from within, and so on. It just felt a little bit repetitive to add extra drama. And especially when they immediately diminished it, where, like, for a second you think they might consider killing off, like, the paladins, or, like, making them seem missing in some way because they're caught in the blast, but immediately they cut to the lines completely intact, falling. So, like, okay, they're going to hit the ground, but they'll be okay. And just establishing that the paladins are all injured, they're in hospital after this, but that they're still fine. In the end, like, you know, perfectly fine resolution, I think. It's just the little bits and pieces that go into making, I think, a really, really strong ending action scene. And you see the rebuilding process, you see Hunk finally reunite with his family, you see each of the important characters to the paladins in the hotel, in the hospital rooms with them, like Rommel and Karan are with Allura. Matt returns, and because he's gone through his 3-year time skip, he actually looks much more mature now, which is quite interesting. So that's pretty funny. In that, like, notably, like, they seem to have taken away part of the kind of geeky side to him. So I'm sort of wondering, will they play up on that as we go forward? That Matt has had this kind of complete turnaround or something like that. But we'll see how they play that out. Again, they were sort of running low on time at this point. They had to get through a lot of stuff. They just cover all of these things, all the paladins kind of meeting up with the people. You see Keith and Kralia go to his father's grave, which was Oxia out of nowhere just appears and is kind of behind them. Again, you know, I feel like I've been one of the only people out there being like, Keith and Oxia, they're going for that relationship, and they seem to maybe be going for that. They didn't show us exactly what happened, but just that she's there next to him to potentially have a scene with him. So we'll see what happens in terms of, like, endgame type stuff. I really do feel once those two characters talk and fully get a chance to be on the same side, because of course they just had Oxia sort of go missing midway through the season. They don't think they really explained where she went, so you know, that is what it is. But yeah, the big finale kind of cliffhanger going into the final season is that they managed to find all the pieces of the destroyed mech, and they find the power source, and it's revealed to be an Altean pilot. One Altean pilot looks to be a female inside, not one we recognize, and all of a sudden it's like, what are we going to take away from that? Like, what sort of a cliffhanger is that? But then you've got to realize we've got one season left. We've still got a lot of open plot points. They never covered where Hagar is this season. Lotor, while he was brought up, was never really referenced what's actually happened to him. 3 years have passed in the real world, while the Paladins have experienced not as much. So Lotor could have returned in that kind of time period, but again, maybe he was affected by the time thing too, so maybe he'll only appear later on. But that very well could have happened. As I said, Hagar is still out there. You've got things like Randveg super weapons still to be resolved. They mentioned it at one point during this season that the Blades went to the colony and found all of the people gone. We don't know how that exactly happened. And given that there were Altaeans there, the immediate connection that I'm making is that in the past 3 years, Hagar and Lotor, I don't know if Lotor is necessarily involved, but I think Hagar took all the people away from Lotor's colonies. She has been in the past the one who's made the roe beasts for Zarkon. She would obviously know about all the kind of crazy quintessence powered mech stuff. She can make them now because she has the Orionde powers. She has the ability to make a Voltron. She has people who she knows are powerful with quintessence, because that was the whole point of the colony, that they got people who were powerful with quintessence. It might link into the super weapon thing with Randveg of like a super powered quintessence person, and that would explain why one person is able to power a Voltron-like thing on their own, and it be 10 times more powerful than Voltron is at this point. Now the question is it a one-off? I'm assuming there are probably multiple of these, and Team Voltron in the last season is going to have to go through some pretty big upgrades. They're probably going to have to do a proper full-on upgrade of Voltron in some way to be able to match up to these things regularly, because they barely got out of this on their own. Now, the heroes are going to have time to rebuild. The Atlas is going to be completely finished. It'll be more powerful. They'll have, I suppose, more fighters, more trained fighters. The whole coalition is now in play. They still have to rebuild part of the coalition because of what's happened in the last 3 years, but it's still a thing that they can do. So, I think that's probably where they're going with all of this when it really comes out, that I do feel we'll get more Altaean pilots behind other type of mechs that will be a challenge for Voltron. I don't know how they're necessarily going to do the nature of the final battle, in that I feel they've done enough to set up Hagar as the ultimate main villain in the end, and her and Allura having some sort of a fight using magic. There'll be some sort of a big Voltron fight in the last season, and you know, that sort of thing. Will they in any way attempt to redeem Lotor after what's happened? I'm not sure, but they may give it a chance, and I think this is where they're going to have to address the whole topic of the quintessence basically attaching itself to like evil intent within people and like changing them, and how with Lotor they more went down the road of just the energy like made him more evil than like there was a slight element of evilness within him, and it brought that out. And they've sort of retroactively gone back and said that that's exactly what happened with Zarkon and Unnerva. But from what we saw, it was an actual like sentient energy that itself had power that just kind of latched itself onto those two in the end. So I'm thinking we may have another Voltron fight against that sentient energy in an effort to potentially like reclaim who Unnerva actually is, or maybe Lotor, and like resolve that once and for all. I'm not overly sure, but something along those lines I think they will do. Because it is interesting that they very quickly, right at the end, incorporated everything into Earth right at the end of the season. They had basically all the races of the Voltron Coalition basically come to Earth. Earth is now going to be like more or less the central location of the Voltron Coalition, it seems like anyway, now that Voltron is back. And that's something I thought they maybe would have done as like the resolution in the epilogue of the last season. But I think they're probably leaving it now for like, they'll end the war and they'll probably devote the last 1 or 2 episodes of next season to just resolving everything. And that's like romances, finding out where things are. What is a peaceful world like? How entwined are all of the different species and so on. And so on. That's that. The other thing I think they might do is, if there is some sort of big final Voltron power-up, I feel they'll do something along the lines where like the Paladins sort of like connect with the previous Paladins, and do that sort of like generational thing of like, they basically established that the previous batch of Paladins more or less used Voltron at its most powerful, and our current batch haven't quite managed to do that just yet. And maybe through connecting with them, they'll finally manage to do it. So that's some early speculation. Again, I'll have more videos on Voltron Season 7 as I kind of watch some more episodes again, because I think the thing with this was I enjoyed doing the videos as I went through my initial rewatch, but initial watch through, but there's so much going on. 13 whole episodes, a full season. It's a lot to try and cover immediately. So I'll have other videos on specific topics, and as the days goes on and I see what people are reacting to with the season and not. So far, all I've really seen is the very negative reaction from a lot of Tumblr to the whole Shiro Adam thing. And again, I talked about it I think a little bit in the last video. Very quickly, my thoughts on that are that Shiro is not defined by the fact that he's gay. What they did here was just note that here's a thing about him. You can now be aware that he is gay. But then the relationship was not a plot point that they necessarily wanted to have be a constant presence in the season. That they seem to be more going with the younger characters having the romances, and that Shiro, maybe they'll set him up with someone after this going forward, but for now they don't want to do that necessarily. And I'll admit, I did think they would do a little bit more than they actually did, partly because they made such a big deal of it at Comic-Con, and I think that's partly why there has been such a backlash against how they've done this, in that I think they potentially may have accidentally led people astray, and let their imaginations run wild about just how in-depth of an arc they would have about this. Whereas I always kept it in mind, like, okay, look, I can see the way they're talking about this is that they want to make this a plot point, but they don't want to make this sledgehammer level plot point where they are smashing you over the head. Shiro's gay, look how gay he is, and, you know, have characters literally in the show react to the fact that he's gay. Instead, it's just like, oh, revealed through backstory. It's not actually an issue to anyone. It's just, to us as the audience, we are finding out that, oh, his relationship is with a guy. Okay, I get what you were going for. And yes, it's unfortunate we didn't get to see Adam a little bit more, but the arc was more about Shiro's illness and the fact that his pursuit of wanting to do all these missions sort of led him away from Adam, and, you know, they made that decision to basically break up at that point. I think it's fine for what it is, but I can understand to a degree what they did, but the reaction of some people, I think, is very over the top about it, in that, look, I get you were sort of invested in this relationship, but let's be fair here. So many people went super hyper overboard when we didn't know the details about it. You confirmed Shiro's gay, you confirmed this character Adam, but they never confirmed any of the details. They never said how many scenes there would be. They never really said it was going to be an arc as such. Just that here's the flashback and we'll cover it. And that's what they did. And for me, this is actually a fairly good use of representation, where it shouldn't be a massive plot point that a character is gay. It should just be a thing that you note about the character, just like you'd note like anything else about them. And I think that's the thing to say. Similarly with a lot of the other kind of ships that people support, like, I think there's people frustrated with some of the decisions that they seem to make, and that I think they very much double down that Lance and Allura is going to be a thing. I think when Veronica started to like tease Lance about it, and you had that scene just before they went out on their missions where she came up, and I think if not for the awkwardness with Veronica, you probably would have had a little bit more of a proper romance scene between the two of them. But I think they're very much building towards that at some point. And then I think Keith Oxia is something you might do. Shay came back as well with Hunk. That was something I forgot to mention there. That was a really cool little bit where we saw her walk into the room. That was really nice to see. I was wondering if they forget about that, and I was maybe thinking, are they going to go down the Ramel route? But obviously not. Meaning that they don't really have Paige set up with anyone, but I don't think they've ever really committed to any romance with Paige. So, yeah. They're my initial thoughts on Voltron Legendary Defender Season 7. I thought it was a very good season. Not perfect. Definitely has its issues in that I think over the course of it, it was definitely a little bit, I'd say, up and down, in that it had its very good moments, but there were moments where it was just kind of like solid, and it kind of went up and down a little bit. In that certain episodes were very good, like the 7 and 8 two-parter. The first episode was very good, and then there were other ones like episode 4, episode 2 a little bit, episode 5, not the greatest, but overall I think they accomplished a lot in the season where they got back to Earth. The only thing now is that very much the countdown is on. I began to notice this in the last couple of episodes of just like, we don't have long left with this show. Very quickly we are going to get into this period where we are counting up the things that we want resolved and we want to happen in the final episodes of the show, and the number of episodes are going to run out, and they probably won't resolve everything. And so that's always a problem with a series when it comes to an end. But that is my initial thoughts on Voltron Legendary Defender Season 7. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on it after your first viewing. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.